Tonight, Melbourne's flood emergency. Hundreds of homes underwater. Residents plucked to safety as the Maribyrnong River erupts. Werribee and suburbs along the Yarra also in the firing line as the Premier warns the crisis will worsen. A race against time to save stranded horses as entire towns become no-go zones. In flood-weary Rochester, a cancer patient's tearful reunion with her gravely ill dog. Plus a fiery emergency landing at Essendon Airport and a Saints bombshell, Brett Ratton booted as coach just months after a 2-year contract extension.
This is Melbourne's 9 News with Alicia Loxley.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of 9 News, coming to you live from the banks of the Maribyrnong River, which today burst its banks, inundating dozens of homes and businesses, causing some of the worst flooding in a generation. This is the epicentre of Victoria's still unfolding emergency, but across the state, hundreds of properties are underwater and the threat is far from over. Our reporters are at key locations around Melbourne and throughout regional Victoria to bring you the very latest tonight. But Mark Santomartino begins tonight's coverage in Maribyrnong.
Clouds were clearing over Melbourne as the banks of the Maribyrnong broke and the emergency began. Antoinette and her neighbours were among the first to be plucked from inundated homes by an undermanned but determined SES.
SES have rescued our dog and the cat, but it's quite testing.
Countless cars were trapped in the torrent that swept through businesses on the banks and down Maribyrnong Road, swallowing suburban streets.
We have live coverage of flash flooding overnight.
With a force that carried skips, ripped equipment from the Westgate Tunnel project and pontoons away from their moorings. As children were carried and pets and families were rescued, Good Samaritans did what they could, helping an elderly man.
You have no one else at home?
Before going back for his wife, water lapping at their door.
Not inside yet, but soon.
James Philpott was rescued from Leopold Street. At 4 a.m, he got a text urging him to evacuate.
Out of control, just started rising and I think no one predicted it would be this bad.
We prepared, but I was really unprepared for this. So some sandbags, but they just didn't do anything. Everything's under. The fridges have tipped over downstairs, the washing machine, it's pretty much the laundry was filling up.
Maribyrnong locals are no stranger to floods.
I was here in mid-80s when it went. I think this is starting to get a little bit worse.
But after Melbourne dodged the worst of yesterday's rain, no one predicted kids getting ready for school would be rushed to neighbouring roofs.
I was freaking out what to do next. But after they saved us, I was like, phew.
Escape wasn't easy. Residents guided cars along fences and footpaths confronted by rivers over roads. With orders to fill, Ben Nicolisi had to put his business over his home.
We don't know what to do, don't know where to go. I mean, we've got places where we can go, but it's family home of, 60, 70 years. So we just hope nothing gets damaged.
For one 93-year-old, that hope has faded. She was trapped, stranded on the second floor of her home, confronted by this.
Everything's gone.
Electricity's on, water, hot water, it's all fine. So, no issues staying here.
Most did find refuge at a community hall. One father and his newborn found safety at a bus stop. Others relied on the goodwill of strangers.
I saw the devastation. I thought I might come and do something, help as much as I can.
To give you a sense of the power of this water, these metal sheds were about 50 metres that way in the middle of this athletics track before the flood hit. They've been carried right up here to the bank. This entire track was only renovated a couple of years ago, and in a few weeks' time it was meant to host the Essendon Gift.
Yeah, we only had it resurface about 2, maybe 3 years ago maximum, so hopefully it hasn't lifted underneath the water.
We only found out at 5 o'clock this morning, so not enough time to do anything really.
The SES door-knocked as many as they could, but they too were only expecting moderate flooding.
What we've seen is rainfall that exceeded the initial forecasts. We also saw it coinciding with the high tide. I couldn't tell you which houses may not have been doormat that have been impacted, but what I can say is there's been warnings out for those communities for several days.
It's shameful that the people of the city of Maribyrnong are not serviced well. There's an election coming up. I don't care who gets in. I just wish whoever gets in will put more money, more funding, more resources into the Footscray unit and the SES in general across the state.
And Mark is at the Maribyrnong Relief Centre on Randall Street tonight. Mark, what kind of support are people getting there?
Well, people are picking up care packages, Alicia. There's food, water, they can use the bathrooms, power their devices, but it's not an evacuation centre. There's nowhere for these people to sleep. Many of those, as part of the more than 100 or so homes in Maribyrnong that are affected, will be relying on friends and family, but those who have nowhere to stay are relying on these hard-working volunteers, getting their details and putting them up in places to stay for the night. When they can go back to their homes is still a bit iffy. At the moment, we know the water is receding. However, it's not all the way back in the river just yet. How long that process takes is anyone's guess, and what they're going to find will take a long time to clean up, Alicia.
Certainly will. OK, Mark Santamartino, thank you. And as Mark said, with the dirty brown water now receding for so many homeowners along the Maribyrnong River, the slow and painful task of cleaning up has already begun. Maggie Rayworth is along the Esplanade and joins me now. Maggie, how much damage are locals dealing with there?
There's a severe amount of damage to this area. Now, I'm at a flood-affected home on the Esplanade. That's one of the main affected streets in Maribyrnong. Now, the resident of this home has invited us in because they wanted to show just the full extent of how much just their property has received. Now, if you look around, there's debris just even on the floor here. Things have been lifted anywhere they can be put, and that's because after the floods receded about 2 hours ago, with that flood water brought in debris and rubbish. So that's when the clean-up effort started for a lot of these residents. But they're just the lucky residents. We know so many more people are standing around waiting for those flood waters to recede so they can actually re-enter their homes. So now the clean-up is very much underway. But I'll just show you in here. Inside here is actually the residents' garage, and that is about knee-deep water. All of their belongings inside their garage there have been completely destroyed. So she's preparing to throw all of those things out because the water has destroyed nearly all of her belongings. Now, I'm in the backyard here, and if you take a look just at the grass here, it's muddy. There's still water here. The resident here, Mariuka, she says that her furniture in the backyard has just simply been thrown around. So just here, this table here, that was completely shifted in the flood. So it was certainly some strong water coming through her backyard. Now, this is Mariuka. Thank you, Mariuka. Tell us about your house and the damage that's been done.
It's been a lot of damage now to clean up, really. I've been the fortunate one. It didn't come through my house. It was tickling under the floorboards, so I rolled up all the rugs. But as you can see along the hedge there, how high it got in my backyard.
Now, your backyard's really just, the water's just really disappeared in the last hour. Describe what it looked like here just a few moments ago, really.
It was a lake. It was really a lake. I don't want a swimming pool anymore. I always wanted one.
At least you can laugh about it, Mariuka. But obviously the clean-up effort continues. A lot of people are waiting. We've had people come from different suburbs just to simply help people like Mariuka get that debris out of their homes. But a long clean-up effort will continue tonight.
Oh, huge clean-up ahead. OK, Maggie Rayworth there, thank you. Well, despite the best efforts to prepare, several businesses along the Maribyrnong have been hit hard by the rising water. As Heidi Murphy explains, they are now bracing for enormous damage bills.
The water seemed to come from nowhere.
7 o'clock it was fine. The car park was all clear and dry. We could see Aberfeldy Park was filling up. But then really within about a 10-minute period it just went straight up.
In 40 years, the growing area at Poynton's Nursery has never been this wet.
I've been through about 3 floods over the years, and so I've seen the levels that it's come to, but this is extraordinary. Never seen it so bad.
Not much of this salvageable.
Thousands of dollars worth of stock that was all ready to come into the nursery, but we've lost machinery out there too. couldn't get that out quickly enough. It just came up so fast.
From before dawn, the Anglers Tavern was being stalked, the level rising by the hour.
I stood here for almost 4 hours this morning just watching as the water kept coming through.
Sandbags lined up yesterday, useless.
We anticipated waist high at the worst, and as you can see, it's up to the second story already, so it's big.
Directly across the river on the high side, the tide line stopped just short of the boathouse.
We've sort of been keeping tabs on things since last night. We haven't seen it this bad.
Further south at Flemington, the home of the Spring Carnival was saved by a levee wall built in the 2000s for this very scenario. The same couldn't be said for some stables. The wait now begins for the water to go and the aid to arrive.
When the threat recedes, as we hope it does, then it becomes a difficult challenge for recovery.
The only payment on offer so far, one-off emergency cash for those forced to leave their homes.
It's about accommodation, food, clothing, medicine, very practical support.
To apply, head to emergencypayments.dffh.vic.gov.au or call 1800 226 226. And there could be more to come in days ahead.
The federal government stands ready to provide support and assistance. There are already ADF personnel on the ground.
For those forced out of their homes for longer, confirmation to turn the Mickleham Quarantine Hub into a flood accommodation centre.
If it is needed, and I think that is likely, we can't be certain, but I think that is likely, and it's very good to have an option. Some of the numbers that we're talking about, for instance, in the Goulburn Valley, would, I think, far exceed the number of hotel rooms, for instance, that might be available.
Heidi Murphy, 9 News.
Well, the Yarra River peaked at almost 9 metres this afternoon, with golf courses, sports fields and the North East Link construction site among the spots going under. Madeline Slattery is monitoring the situation at Bulleen right now. Maddie, will it continue to rise?
Well, Alicia, the water levels have increased since we arrived this afternoon, but the Yarra has just started to fall and it's around 8.5 metres now, so at the moderate flood level. But nearby areas have been inundated. Bulleen Road is closed, along with many other surrounding roads. Marcelin College and Trinity Grammar have been severely affected. One of the sports ovals just near Marcelin was underwater when we got here this afternoon, and not long after that, a second oval disappeared under the floodwaters. Elsewhere, the Werribee River reached 5 metres this afternoon and an emergency warning was issued. It is now under a watch and act. It's expected to drop below the moderate flood level of 4.5 metres this evening. There are still 11 major flood warnings in place across the state, and some rivers through the north, including the Goulburn at Shepparton, aren't expected to peak until Tuesday. So while the rivers around Melbourne will subside in the next couple of days, the Bureau has told us that it'll be a 4 to 6 week experience for northern Victoria, where the floodwaters take a lot longer to move downstream, Alicia.
Just incredible. All right, Maddie, we'll see you a bit later on in the bulletin. Well, let's look at Seymour now, north of Melbourne, and at least 300 properties there have been swamped. As Penelope Leash reports, residents and dozens of prized horses were lucky to escape to higher ground. Swimming against a rising current, a race against time to keep dozens of horses' heads above water. Finally led to safety at Mangalore. Saved by boats in Seymour too, water police coming to the rescue of residents who fled their homes, stranded at Aldi overnight, delivered with their dogs to dry land.
About midnight, the water got a bit too high. I got a little bit nervous when the water started lapping at the door.
The rescues continuing around the clock, people and pets helped to safety. In the morning light, Seymour was submerged. 300 properties affected, homes, businesses, cars and roads inundated. Taxis abandoned in a floating car park.
All of this, I grew up here and it's the first time I've seen it underwater this bad.
Just too much rain, couldn't cope.
We're lucky we came in last night and lifted all the stock off the floor.
It was quick to rise, the route out of town swallowed in hours, rewriting the 1974 flood record, transforming streets into rivers, water lapping walls inside and out. Those returning finding their houses cut off by hundreds of metres of water.
I knew it'd be bad, but when I just came round and saw the water, it's, very emotional. Yeah. And we've got to face when we can get back into it.
Residents still inside trying to salvage what they can and escape. Water police and local boats have been rescuing residents for hours. While the water levels are receding, there's concerns they may begin to rise again because of the amount of water being released at Lake Eildon. Flood levels are expected to sail through until Sunday. A community already out in force, bringing anything they have from boats to brooms, trying to keep their town afloat.
We went in the shop and there was about 2 inches of water. So when we walked in the dark, and yeah, it was just a shock.
As the Premier flew into Shepparton to see firsthand how the statewide crisis is being managed. Water taking over Benalla, the footy ground and bowls club under, rising levels around the library as residents are urged to evacuate. And it is going to be an anxious night ahead for many in those regional towns. Penelope Liersch joins me now. Penny, Benalla and Shepparton are next in the firing line. Alicia, you can see just how quickly the water is moving through Lake Benalla. That's coming from the Broken River. It's spilled onto that footy ground at Benalla behind us. There's roads cut off here as well. Residents being urged to evacuate to get to higher ground with these river levels continuing to rise. Over towards Shepparton, there's concerns there will be major flooding from tomorrow, particular concerns around Orvale, Kyella West and over to Euroa. The Premier has been in Shepparton this afternoon. He's expected to tour flood-affected areas of the state tomorrow as well. And in Wangaratta, there's a watch and act in place there. Residents keeping an eye on the Ovens River, which is also continuing to rise. So, Alicia, north and northeastern parts of the state in the firing line, they are getting very close to feeling the full effects of these floods. OK, Penny, thank you. Well, with water levels on the rise tonight, residents of Charlton, northwest of Bendigo, are taking shelter at an evacuation centre at Witcherproof. Adam Hegarty is there for us tonight. Adam, how are the residents there feeling?
Well, Lisa, as you'd imagine, very nervous. Around 80 properties are anticipated to go under as flood levels peak in Charlton this evening. Pam here is one of the evacuees here. Pam, it must be a really tough time for you. How are you feeling right now?
Pretty uptight. We got the message and I just freaked. It looks like someone ransacked the house.
And the fear is too that it could equal 2010, 2011 flood levels. Here's the Mayor talking about that very thing.
Obviously, they go into a new event with sort of no comfort that the authorities are on the ground.
I'm here with some friends at my shop. It's never gone under before and we're praying it doesn't this time, but there's no guarantees. The water is coming up the road actually, so it's a bit scary.
And this is desperately what they don't want to happen. This was Carisbrook overnight, last night and into this morning. You can see the damage of several houses there swept up in the floodwater. The floodwater got to about waist level. Absolutely trashing homes there. Fridges flipped, tables flipped, chairs flipped as well. Living rooms absolutely destroyed, covered in mud. Now it's the clean-up. We spoke to one of the residents.
I had a barbecue and a fire pit area down the back there. I had a lot of trees planted down there and shrubs and all that sort of thing, and a bit of garden art and all of that. So that's washed somewhere down the creek a few kilometres away.
So, Alicia, once again, residents unfortunately waiting with bated breath.
Yes, indeed. All right, Adam Hegarty, we'll leave it there. Thank you. But coming up after the break for you, our special coverage of the flood emergency continues, including a cancer patient's heartbreaking reunion with her gravely ill dog. Also, a live update from the State Control Centre with the latest information on this unfolding emergency.
It's Caulfield Cup Eve. Join us live as we update the conditions on the track and off it.